Hello, I'm Marites Vito. Welcome to Rappler Talk. Joining us is Ambassador Laura del Rosario, former Undersecretary at the Department of Foreign Affairs. Currently, she is president of Miriam College. I will be talking to the ambassador about foreign policy as an election issue and why it hasn't caught the public's imagination. I will also be asking her about the teaching of history in the Philippines from her perch as president of Miriam College. Thank you so much, Ambassador Del Rosario, for making time for this interview. We know that you have a very busy schedule.
Okay. Thank you very much, Marites, for asking me to join you. It's really pleasure and honor to be with you today.
Yes, ma'am, let's start maybe dahil election na tayo sa May and officially the campaign will begin next month. Ang napapansin ko natin that foreign policy is not a hot election issue. Uh, that's typical, isn't it? Or maybe you would recall na there was a time during your many years at the DFA na naging issue ang foreign policy sa isang national election.
Okay. I think, personally, I think during this election period, foreign policy should be an issue. Okay. In the past, it was never an issue, or we never thought that it should really be an issue because our um, policy decisions and our policy positions have remained steady through the years. Okay, we started with the Cold War upon our independence, and then later on, when the Soviet Union collapsed, we had a unipolar system. But now you have a rising China, and then you have China who is really asserting itself on us. So perhaps the Filipinos are not used to this, that all of a sudden now it should really be something that they should decide on because it is something which is really getting into our everyday lives, so to speak. But at the same time, it's also possible that they are trying to figure out what what it will really mean, because if you notice, even our president changed somewhat. I mean, he pivoted towards China, which is 180 degrees from the US. But there were also instances when he issued statements that were somehow backing our arbitral tribunal, and then later on he would pedal back again. So it's possible that the people themselves, they're trying to figure out how serious is this issue, and how how hard are we in our position when it comes to China, and assuming that, of course, that the successor follow the present president, hedging, or should we be clearer as we were clear in the past?
So dapat this election, as you said, it should be
Dapat,
a foreign
yeah,
it
yeah.
should be an issue. And
Oo.
how do we, maybe the media, or maybe what is your advice to candidates? How should they talk about it? How do they popularize this subject?
Okay. I think ang the ordinary person, no? The ordinary man in the street is interested in foreign policy because wherever I go, when I meet relatives, friends, they would always ask me about what I think. So I said they're quiet, but they're interested, and they think it should be something that should be clarified as far as the candidates are concerned. But it has to be the media that should raise it. Because if it's just the people, they will say, baka naman hindi ganito ka-importante. Because you see, what is important is also decided by what is being discussed in the media. The people are also taking their cues from there. So if the media is quiet, they'll be quiet. Although bulong-bulungan yan, di ba, among themselves, in gatherings, they talk about that. And as I said, it's the first time that we did a really clear 180-degree change in our traditional policy on defense and security.
So you describe Duterte's policy as hedging. What should be the ideal position?
As hedging towards the end, if you notice the past
Okay.
3 months, nag-hedge siya, di
Yes.
ba? I mean, when
Yes.
he issued a statement in the UN, for some people it was a surprise. He supported the arbitral tribunal, coming from the position that it was just a piece of paper, and then later on he said it is part of international jurisprudence. People were thinking, what is he trying to say now? I think he swung back and forth during the past 6 months. And I think that also confused people. And I think it's also now really that, since this is also a signal from the top, how should we handle it? Should we be vacillating back and forth? Because the president's position was really on the arbitral tribunal decision and how to handle that. But as
So,
far as
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, go ahead, please, ma'am.
But as far as dealing with China, to me, the problem really with our relationship with China is not so much how we deal with it, because traditionally we have always been working with China on many issues, all right, especially also in the economic front. But to me, the crucial thing that really creates a difference as I said, the arbitration case. That's where the difference comes in between the previous administration and this one.
So, you said something very important, ma'am, which is that this is the first time in our contemporary history that we changed foreign policy, that there was a change. Maybe just broadly, can you explain to us, paano ba shape ang foreign policy? Kasi I
Okay.
remember in one webinar, you explained it very well. So maybe for our audience, enlightenment as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Okay. Every time there's a change of administration, all government agencies or all government departments prepare a briefing book for the president. Of course, for us, we give the context, the history, the background, and the history of our position on every issue that you can think of under the United Nations, under regional cooperation, under our bilateral relations. And therefore, any incoming president will be able to see the historical perspective and how we arrived at that position. But when it came to President Duterte, he did a very surprising pronouncement, right? Because immediately he somehow issued a statement that somehow antagonized the U.S. in a way. Okay, and at the same time, it really shocked the people. Maybe because they were also shocked by the language that he used. But when you say, okay, we have to maintain our relationship with China, but the problem is at that time, he immediately latched on because the decision was handed 6 weeks within his administration. So that became sort of the central point of everything that he would say about the US and China. Okay. And then he went into the visiting forces agreement and so on. So for us who have been there, we I mean, we saw how the change came about. When you definitely many people think that the mutual defense treaty must be reviewed, must be updated. I mean, every reasonable person will see the reason behind that. But holding the visiting forces agreement as hostage, so to speak, for a number of months, and also at the same time saying, quoting even verbatim, the President Xi Jinping's comment that the decision is just a piece of paper, that can be thrown into the wastebasket. That really was really something very dramatic and very, very, as I say, unusual. Okay, in
So
that
past
sense.
presidents, you've seen a number of presidents, and they have consulted. There's a consultation process with the
Yeah,
DFA as
they
well.
they they take,
Yeah.
they take into consideration the briefing notes. Okay, so that means that gives them the context, and then later on, of course, they draw up their own foreign policy for the next 6 years. Like if you recall, in the case of President Fidel Ramos, it was very economic. Said, okay, we will open up investments, we will attract more, we will liberalize, we will privatize, and then of course he appointed people who are technocrats. And of course our foreign policy then was really of openness, opening our markets, opening ourselves also to to be able to engage them. So it was really very economic because at that time we were coming out from a series of coup d'etats, and it somehow dampened the heightened interest of the investors at the beginning of the Cory Aquino administration. We had a lot of investors coming in. I was witness to that because I was in Singapore and I could see all the queries coming in. But when the coup d'etat started being staged, within weeks after one another, by 1989, everything became, stood still, so to speak. So the people started to wait and see. So and it took a lot of time, 1989 until 1992. That's 3 years, and then we had the Mount Pinatubo and we had the earthquake. So when it was President Ramos, it was really very economic in approach. It was economic diplomacy at the center of his foreign policy. So that's how it is. They give a signal of about where they are going, and then of course even with President Arroyo, isn't it he focused our relations on ASEAN, on the three countries that are important to us: China, Japan, and the US. Okay, so you could see where they were going, and I think he even talked about the 6 point or 8 points that were important to Philippine foreign relations. But in the case of President Duterte, it was at the beginning. It was already U.S. versus China. He
Mm.
he to me he polarized the issue. I mean that's why we are where we are right now. He did not talk about the other alliances that we have because other presidents and even if you go to President Arroyo, he really went she went into the regional relationships also as part of that. Okay,
Yeah,
and of
it's very interesting that the perspective of having worked under, I think, three or four presidents,
since
ma'am.
Marcos.
Okay.
I'm
So,
sorry.
but,
I entered
but
government when I was very young, under President Marcos. It was towards the end of his administration. But even then, okay, let's talk about President Marcos. It was very clear then. It was the Cold War. I mean, we have to choose just one side of the political divide, right? There is no third point. There's no third what do you call that? A third position. So it's either you are with us or against us. And of course there was the non-aligned movement. And I remember we were talking about joining the non-aligned movement, and I recall the Indonesians tell me, they said, Laura, you cannot be non-aligned because you have the military bases in the Philippines. So how can you be non-aligned? So okay. So that was how it was. So when the bases left, that's why President Ramos, remember the bases left right at the beginning of his administration. That's why he focused on economics, economic diplomacy, yeah. And then when it was President Arroyo, it was really our many alliances. You know, it was even and then of course even with President Arroyo, she even included the overseas workers, right? As the eighth point, I think, because during President Ramos' time, the issue of Lord Contemplacion happened. And if you recall, he lost the elections, the midterm elections because of that. And I think
so,
it's because
ma'am,
of, mm,
yes, for the next president, what would you like to see? What would you like to hear about foreign policy? As you said, under Ramos, the context was we needed to get investments. So very
yeah,
strategic siya economically. Same with
yeah,
Arroyo. She also expanded alliances.
yeah.
How about for the next president? What would you
I think
like to
the
hear?
next president should not really start with the polarization, or what I call it, the the division of the war between either you are US, pro-US or anti-US. And does that mean that if you're pro-US, you should be anti-China? Yung ganun that's how the debate was framed. And so it became a little bit complicated. To me, what is important really is how can we work with all our alliances on having a peaceful, secure South China Sea, because we are not the only ones being affected here. You just have to think of Australia, New Zealand, Japan, North Korea. I mean, it so happened we're there in the center. We're really strategically located. But our position is very crucial. When whatever position we take, it makes our allies nervous. Okay, because they have to figure out, okay, what do they mean by that? I remember one military guy, I'll tell you, from one of our ally, not American, one from our allies. He was here. He was in he was part of a visiting ship, and at that time, we were waiting for the decision on the arbitration case. It was, I think, around May 2016. It was towards the end of the Aquino administration. He told me, he said, Laura, he said, we're taking cues from you, from the Philippines, because we would not know how to proceed unless you take a position and unless you somehow discuss the matter with us, right? So in other words, to them, winning the case, which will just be part of international law or of international jurisprudence, is not just because of us. They're looking at it as somehow clarifying how much a nation can do as far as the UNCLOS is concerned. So in other words, hindi tayo nag-iisa, hindi lang naman tayo ang bansa dito sa rehiyon na ito eh. That's why we also have our own responsibilities, you know, towards the ASEAN countries, our allies, and then we go outward towards Australia, New Zealand, Japan, North Korea, even towards the United States and Canada. And you can go as far as Europe. Because if you notice, even the French and the Germans now are getting really quite involved in the Indo-Pacific idea, the concept of the Indo-Pacific. Okay, so even India, which used to be so focused on towards the west, now it's looking more and more towards the east because India knows that there's a lot of happening in this part of the world.
Yeah, for maybe just one question about what qualification or qualification should the president have to be prepared to deal with the world? Kasi walang experience most of them
Oh,
eh.
I know. Ninenervyos ka rin ako. Marites. Yeah,
Anong
yeah,
kailangan
right.
frame of mind? I mean, or maybe good advisors or
Actually, ang pinaka-importante dyan, really, you should really have a very good national security team. Okay? When it comes to national security, it's just not defense and foreign affairs. You really have the national security people. The people, isn't it you have the national security advisor, right? And you have the intelligence community, as we call them. And then you have the
oh, I think, ma'am, you froze. Okay, while we're waiting, Ambassador, uh, okay, while we're waiting for Ambassador del Rosario to reconnect, it was very interesting that she pointed out the different strategic perspectives of past presidents. President Ramos was focused on economic diplomacy, coming because we came out from the Cory years, wherein there was a lot of instability and coups. And then after President Ramos, President Gloria Arroyo continued the economic diplomacy, and then she expanded, according to Ambassador Del Rosario, she expanded to focus on our allies. Okay, Ma, I'm
yeah,
sorry we lost you, but please continue your
okay.
answer a discussion.
Mm.
Yeah.
And as I said, they also have to consult the policy thinkers. I mean, we have a lot of think tanks. We have experts in foreign policy, from various universities. There are various groups and associations. And then they have their own contacts among their counterparts in various parts of the world. We call that track two. The track to avenue, to me, is very enriching. When I was in the DFA, what made me understand us better really is really to talk to these academic people who have their own contacts, let's say in Canada, in Australia, in Europe, in France, in Germany. And these people tell one another, they exchange views on what they think is happening in the world because they're the ones who see the players, who see the actors. And if we listen to them, we will know how the world sees everybody else. I mean, sometimes we're just so focused on the domestic aspect of our lives. Even foreign policy, it can also be, to me, it was a debate even among my peers and myself. Should foreign policy be dictated by domestic policy? Or should it
Mhm.
be dictated by something universal and higher, right? So when we talk about us, what are our core principles when it comes to foreign policy? Is it the democratic principles, human rights, okay, sovereignty, freedom? But then at the same time, you have the events at home. How much should the events at home really impact on our foreign policy? And that takes a lot, really, of what I call political maturity on the part of the president. So, so if you recall, let's go back to the contemplation case. The overseas workers became a foreign policy issue. It suddenly became a major part. That's why later on, when people talk about the three pillars or four pillars of foreign policy, overseas Filipinos became one of them, whereas before it was not an issue. So there are domestic considerations to be taken, to be considered, and at the same time, we also have to think of what our people desire. But I think foreign policy really should not really be dictated from the top. It's really it should really consider everything, because if you just have to listen to our experts, to our people who are experts in international experts on maritime law, they have to be listened to. It's not what we think is, should be the only one. And even for us in the DFA, we are very careful whenever we craft a position. For every statement that is issued by the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, for every statement that's delivered at the UN in any conference and any summit, it goes through a lot of vetting, and that's how important our words are in that sense.
Yeah, it's fascinating actually to listen to you, ma'am, because of the experience you had with the Department of Foreign Affairs. But maybe to go to another subject, as I since you're now an educator, um, a new
Yeah,
actually you've been an educator for quite some
ever
time.
since. Yeah, I mean, even when
So
I was a foreign service officer, I was teaching. I mean, I taught
yes,
every time I was in the home office. There's something that I want to tell you, Marites. As soon as I left government and I started to run my own school, in Angeles, Pax at Luen International Academy, what I noticed, our textbooks, they did not have a complete, they didn't have a complete what do you call that, account narrative of our history. It was chopped up in various parts from grade 4, I think 5, 6, and then by the time they introduced the K to 12, Philippine history disappeared as a subject in high school.
yeah, so that
And
was what I was going to ask you, and I think perfect that you're talking about it. So why was Philippine history taken out, and how should this be approached now that we're talking again about history during this campaign, election campaign?
yeah, that is it, in fact, I was complaining because it was my first time, and in fact I even thought, I thought, freshmen. Can you imagine teaching grade 7? And I expected to teach Philippine history, and instead they gave me a textbook on Asian history. I said, "Isn't this too early?" I said, "Shouldn't this be for the sophomore?" So the topic, the coverages were, for grade 7 it was Asian history, for grade 8 it was Asian history, grade 8 it was world history, grade 9 it was economics, grade 10 contemporary issues. So I said, where did the Philippine history go? So they said, "Ma'am, nasa grade 4, 5, 6 po, scattered doon sa textbooks na yan." No, no, I said, but you see, what they had really were parts of our culture and our history. But there should be a narrative on how our identity as, independence loving people should be there. To me, it's important that we should know more about the Philippine Revolution. We should know more about how we became an independent republic, how we fought, for our identity, and also how we campaigned with the US. And then, of course, martial law. It is a significant part of our history. It cannot be removed. But somehow it has been diluted. So now people ask us, Ma'am, ano ba talaga nangyari ng martial law, right? And I'm so glad that I think Ateneo put up a museum on martial law, because otherwise everything would disappear. You cannot remove that. I mean, even for the Jews, they put up the Holocaust Museum. Some people say it never happened, right? There's a revisionism on World War II, on how the Jews were treated. And for us, no matter how martial law was seen by one side or the other, it still deserves to be presented, whether you want to present it from the point of view of one side or from the point of view of the other side. It should be presented from both sides, but so that the people can make a judgment on their history. And of course, how many, you cannot just deny the 10,000, you know martial law victims. You cannot erase those. It's still part of the family history, of the families. So it's important, because then if we remove that, we might stumble into it again, meaning we might commit the same mistakes. We have to see how it came about, and how people resisted it. And if some people said it was still the best part of the Philippine history, they said it was very quiet, it was very peaceful, it was very progressive. Okay, then do not remove the other side of it. But right now you don't see the other side. It's only one side of, from the administration side
So,
of
ma'am, as president of Miriam College, you're able to decide because of the lack of textbooks you mentioned earlier, how scattered the accounts are. So
yeah,
you're able to decide other books that you can use because you're
yeah.
for
But
a private
Marites,
university.
there is no textbook that contains everything that happened to us. Wala. Because remember, the textbooks are also vetted by the Department of Education. The textbooks are vetted by by publishers. They have to figure out what will sell, right? But to me, if we have to introduce a part of our history, I'm not saying that, let's just say it from the point of view of those who were victims of martial law, or only from the point of view of, the administration of Marcos. We can present it from both sides, but it should be presented as a complete period in our history. Okay, and the only way we can do it right now, really, is if we can do our own materials and tell our teachers, okay, this is what we can say, this is are the materials so that we can use for our school. But this is just one school. Shouldn't it be done across the board in all the public schools, so that it becomes part of the national consciousness of every Filipino? To me, we do have some proud moments in our history. It is true that at the beginning of martial law, it was really complete, discipline, and we knew what we wanted to do. But then we lost our direction. So we have to know why, what happened, why did we lose it? Didn't we start on the right track? Because at the time, I know that we were trying to imitate Singapore. So why were we not able to do it? It bears a lot of, discussing, because then later on, when our young people become the leaders of their own communities, then they will know. That's the only way, really, how we can really navigate our own destiny. If we know everything that has happened to us, we cannot really just, sweep that under the rug, or say, no, there's no use discussing.
Yeah, so ma'am, you stress again the need for this complete account uh, of our history, not only of martial law, but even of
Yeah, of
our
everything.
Philippine.
Yeah,
And I don't
yeah,
think, yeah, even the history of the evolution of Philippine foreign policy, you talked about it earlier during the Cold War, and
yeah,
then how it has become a multipolar world. So I think
yeah,
the next, whoever leads the country in the next 6 years has a lot of work to do. I mean, on both
yeah, yeah,
fronts.
yeah. In fact, this is something where President Marcos Senior, was good at, when when we started to open ourselves to the communist countries, he handled it in such a way that I was then new in the department. I said, "Oh my God!" I said, "This is really brilliant." Do you know that when he opened embassies in the Soviet Union, in Yugoslavia, in Romania, he chose the best among our diplomats. He chose, of course, Leticia Ramos Shahani was assigned to open up our embassy in Romania, and then of course you have Guerrero to open up Yugoslavia. Okay, and then you had si Luis Moreno Salcedo to open our embassy in the Soviet Union. Okay, so if you have all these thinkers and writers, okay, and then you start to see he chose the shining stars of the foreign service to open our embassies there, just to signal to these people, look, we are willing to engage you. That to me is already very symbolic. Unlike other administrations, they would they would assign people, the best people in Western Europe, and then those whom they don't like so much, they assign them in other countries where nobody wanted to go to. But here we had people who were among the best and the brightest who were assigned in countries where nobody has been before, that were under communist rule. Yeah.
Okay, maybe just the final question, Ambassador. Uh, if there is maybe unsolicited advice, you already gave earlier. You said that the next president should prepare, have
A
a good
team.
national security
Yeah.
team. But are there basic readings?
Yeah.
I
It's
mean, or
hard.
what or attitude? What should be the frame of mind of
So,
a
so
good leader?
okay, for one thing, to me, we have to be very clear about our core principles. Every time I ask people, even in my classes, let's say those are older, the more mature ones, what do you think are the core values of the Filipino? I mean, people say the family. Okay, what else? The family, right? So should our foreign policy revolve around the family? Are there things that we hold sacred? Do we hold human rights sacred? Do we hold our freedom sacred? What else do we hold sacred in addition to the family? And because when you talk to the other people, when you talk to the French, they talk about the liberté, égalité, fraternité, right? And you talk to the Americans, they talk about liberty, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness. Can you imagine that? It's one of their values, the pursuit of happiness and freedom and liberty, right? Freedom to live the way they want to. Tayo, anong gusto natin? And it's always hard because we flip flop even on something as basic as democracy. What is democracy to us? Okay, so why are we afraid always of martial law being imposed? Okay, why are we always afraid of the human rights? Where do we stand on human rights? uh, are we for it? Are we against it? Why is it there was a time when we were supposed to be the exemplars in ASEAN on human rights, and then later on, why is it when human rights issues are discussed in the UN, why do we abstain? I mean, our missions sometimes don't vote because they want they're also being held hostage by our relations with our other partner, by our other allies. For instance, every time there's a human rights resolution against a Middle Eastern country, we are constrained from voting because we are afraid that they will drive out our overseas workers. So our OFWs have become pawns in our own foreign policy positions. And that's what I mean, Marites. We have to figure out what we do, what are the things we're willing to die for. In our song, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo, ano yon? Anong gusto nating gawin na handa tayong mamatay at hindi mag-immigrate? People are always thinking, mag-immigrate na lang ako. It's almost as though we're always thinking of what I call the rabbit escape hatch. There's always something there for us at the back of our minds. That's why I mean I really want uh, I really want us to really to be really very very strong in what we believe in, because
Wow. On
otherwise,
that, yes. On that note, Ambassador, what are we willing to die for, and what do we really believe in? What are our core values? On that
mm-mm,
note, I hope we have inspired or at least provoked our listeners and our viewers after talking to you. So, thank you so much for your
thank you,
time and for
Marites.
sharing your insights. And we
Thank
hope to continue talking about foreign policy, not only as an election issue, but as you said, something that we should all be concerned
you.
about. So
Yes, yeah,
thank you
and
so much.
thank
Yes,
you.
and bye, ma'am. Thank you also
Thank
to
you
our
too.
listeners and viewers.
Okay, thanks.